Howdy. How's it going? This is our weekly Spadefoot class. This is going to be a fun subject tonight. Of course, they're all fun, right? But this one's really fun. We're going to see lots of weird plants. We're going to see lots of just the coolest and most unusual plants that you can grow here, and most of them actually are easier to grow than even some of the native plants. So yeah, it's gonna be fun. Tonight we are drinking Spaceways, Modern Time Spaceways. What are you drinking? Spaceways is a seasonal IPA, right? Yeah, they come out with it every fall, so it's a good beer. So yeah, this subject's going to. It was really hard to limit this class because I've been studying and looking at cacti and succulents my whole entire life, and I still run into new plants all the time. So there's no way in one class that we cover all cacti and succulents. I did try to put in a little bit of this and a little bit of everything, so that we have, we have some native cacti and succulents in the mix. We have some easy to grow cacti and succulents, like some of the common stuff, and then we have lots of weirdos too. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. So why don't we get into it? I'm going to click on this here for a second. Huh? Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me get back. The next few classes, next week is the last planned class we have that's a Spadefoot class. That's growing fruit trees, shrubs, and vines. So that's going to be like, not just trees, but like shrubby fruit plants and vines, like grapes or whatever. So, but large perennial fruiting plants. We're going to go over that. It's a little bit different than vegetable gardening. And then the next two classes after that are with strategic habitat enhancements. The first is called the food garden, and the second is called native plants for pollinators. Those two classes are separate things, so go onto our website and find out how to sign up and save your spot. They do it a little differently than we do, so just be aware of that. And then we'll be planning some new classes. We might take a week off or two so that we can go camping or something. But yeah, those are the next few classes that we have coming up. So let's get on to the class. There's the forever mirror thing. Whoa! And there we are. So this is for the love of weird plants. I'm always reminded of this story. Can you click on that for a second? I'm always reminded of this story, of Mark Demmett, who I don't know who all is watching tonight, but there's a guy named Mark Demmett. And he's a local plant freak. He's internationally known as a breeder of adeniums and orchids and bromeliads. So he's a true plant nut. But I just remember this one time, I think it was at a Cactus and Succulent Society meeting or something. And he suggested we change the name. Instead of calling it the Cactus and Succulent Society, he wanted to call it the Weird Plant Society. And I've always loved that, because that's what this is really about, is weird plants. So we like them because they are the coolest plants in the world, right? For me, this is the plant that it started off with, and I was a really young kid. It was before I was even in grade school. I was an unwatched kid, and I would watch PBS, and there was this thing on drying flowers on PBS. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I went around my neighborhood clipping my neighbor's plants and drying them in my windowsill. And I had a stem of this plant, Sedum rubrotinctum, which I didn't even know the name of it or anything. I just thought, to my little kid brain, was like, what would this dry like? Because I was really curious at how plants look like when they dried. Already, it looks like I was falling into nerddom. But anyway, I forgot about those plants. They sat on my windowsill for a week or so, until it might have even been 2 weeks. I don't remember. It was such a long time ago. But I remember when I went back and all the other plants are dried up and shriveled up, and this plant was still somewhat green, and there were red threads coming out of the stems, and that's I didn't know at first what it was, but I took it to a neighbor of mine who was into plants, and he was a gardener, and he was like, "Son, the plants are trying to grow," and I couldn't believe that you could take a piece of a plant and make a new one. Like I can't cut my finger off and make a new Jared, thank goodness. But so that still baffles me, and that sort of sent me down the road. So it was a succulent that got me into plants, and of course I ended up here in Tucson, Arizona, plant freak capital of the world. I wanted to live where there were agaves and saguaros and stuff, and I just want to start off this class with a warning. Because this is true. Plant obsession will ruin your life. So everything I'm telling you here, like it's sort of like a drug addict pulling in some new drug addicts. It's a terrible habit. It's going to ruin your life. So just be aware of that. That picture on the left, by the way, is the earliest picture I have of myself. With plants. That's back in the 90s. That's actually Mark Demit's greenhouse, and that's an Amorphophallus titanum. Not a succulent, but a very cool plant. That's the one with the gigantic flower that smells like carrion and rotten meat and stuff. That's the leaf it gets. It only gets one leaf. That thing I'm holding is the petiole, and it has that divided umbrella-like leaf on the top there. It puts that leaf out, and then that dies back, and then if you're lucky, 1 year it'll send up a flower. Pretty cool plant. Anyway, so I ended up moving here for that reason, and it was a great place because we have some of the best cactus nurseries in the world here in Tucson, cacti and succulent nurseries. These are just three of them. I had 3 frames, so I put in the 3 that I go to the most, but there's many cactus and succulent nurseries in Tucson, and they all do something a little different. So explore them, talk to the owners. They're all like weird nerds like we are. They love talking about plants. They'll talk your ear off. And they all have their own expertise, and you should really get to know them. And they're all small nurseries, and amazingly enough, they've all been open for decades. So we happen to live in one of the best climates for cacti and succulents, or at least most of them. And so it's a great plant also because, cacti and succulents don't require a lot of nutrition. They're mostly plants that grow in, very rocky soils and with not a lot of organic material in the ground. So they take well to container life. And not a lot of plants do. It makes a great patio plant. They make great patio plants, depending on what kind of cacti or succulent you get into. And while we're on the subject, what is the plural for cactus? Now, this is a debate always, but technically the plural for cactus is cactuses. I don't particularly say that, but that is the correct way to say it. Cactus is derived from a German word. So when you say cacti, you're Latinizing a German word. So that's kind of incorrect. However, we have a living language, and the language is defined by the people who speak it. So if you say cacti, hey, that's what everyone's saying. So both are right. So if somebody comes up to you all snooty like, and they're like, it's cactuses, you could just say, that's cool. I speak a living language. We're going to talk a little bit about some terminology, including the difference between a cactus and a succulent, but some other terminology too that we'll throw around real quick. And we won't use all these words all the time, but it's good to be aware of them. And this is all within basically the subject that we're talking about tonight. So what is a cactus and what is a succulent? A succulent is just a term that's a trait. It's not a family of plants. They're not related. It's just like saying green plants, or it's like saying plants with thorns. Succulent is it just refers to the fact that the plant stores water in its tissues. So there are a few succulents that are not arid land succulents. They're not. They actually don't hold water very well. But they store water in their tissues, but they don't. They're not low water plants. So anyway, just know that's a succulent, and a cactus is actually a family of plants. All cacti are succulents, but not all succulents are cactus. A cactus is a group of related plants in a family, and they're defined by certain traits, but they're basically all, evolutionarily speaking, they're all related. So, by the way, that's a mellow cactus in the picture, which we'll get to. That big thing on the top is a cephalium. It's a weird. It's where the flowers and fruit come out of. Anyway. Then there's caudiciforms, and we're getting into some of my favorite types of plants. Now, caudiciform is a general term for plants that form a caudex, which is a fat, swollen trunk or above ground roots or whatever. The term is loosely used sometimes to refer to geophytes and other things, which we'll get into. A pachycol is sort of like a big fat trunked plant with a few leaves up on the top. They got big long trunks, like if you've seen a baobab before. In this case, that's a Dorstinia gigas, which is a really cool plant in the fig family. But pachycols have a big giant fat trunk, so they're storing water in their trunks, and they look like bonsais without having to bonsai. Question?
What's the difference between a caudex and a thick trunk?
Not a lot. I mean, well, it depends. See, thick trunk it can refer to just any kind of fat trunk. A pachycol or a caudiciform has that look. It's and there's like a lot more trunk to leaf. There's very few leaves and a lot more trunk usually. And it's kind of one of those things like it when you see it. Is that someone?
No, that's just
that was a you question.
That's me.
Then there are phanerophytes, which are plants that have an above ground caudex. So these are divisions of caudiciforms. Okay, so these are small. You don't need to learn these terms, but these are just kind of some of the plants that we'll talk about in this class. Phanerophytes have like an above ground caudex that's substantially raised above the soil. In this case, I think that's Adenia glauca, which is in the passion flower family. And then there's cametophytes, which camophytes, which have caudexes, but they're not as high above the ground. They're just kind of sticking out a little bit. Then there's hemicryptophytes, and that's basically plants with below ground caudex, and the growing center is just above the ground. That's Bufani, by the way, Bufani distinctia, which is a bulbous tropical plant from South Africa, and just a cool looking weird bulb. But and then finally, geophytes have both their caudex and growing points under the ground. Now, a lot of people who grow these kind of plants will sometimes raise those caudices, or caudices is a plural of caudex. They'll raise that base out of the ground to expose that cool looking caudex, but not always. This is a hemanthus, which is another bulb-like plant, and I prefer to grow them like this because I think that looks pretty cool. So it's important when you're learning how to grow cacti and succulents to really pay attention to where the thing is native for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's just interesting. You should just know about the world. If you're growing these plants from all over the world, or you're not bothering to find out anything about where the plant comes from, that's kind of boring in my opinion. So find out about where they come from and what their habitat's like. But you're also going to learn about what they might want. If a plant comes from an area with no winter precipitation, you might not water that thing in the wintertime. It might be prone to rotting. So you'll learn a lot about how to grow them by learning about their habitats. And go out and see them in their habitats if you can. Of course, you live in an area that has a lot of really cool cacti and succulents, so go see them. But if you do see them in habitat, leave them alone. And yeah, I really want to stress this. Like, cacti and succulents are really cool, and I love them. But stick with the plants that are in cultivation already. There's enough pressure on all these plants. That's Graptopetalum rosebii, by the way. Grown out of some cracks in a rock. That's a native Arizona plant. But, when I find these in nature, I actually hide them because people do steal them. And so I kind of try to hide them because, number one, I'm a jerk. But two, I'm protecting the plant from other people because I don't trust people. People love to steal plants, and I don't believe in that. So yeah, especially cacti and succulents, they tend to be on the rare side. So, just try not to try to resist the urge to steal them. And on that note too, there's some plants that you may never come across. Like, this is Aztecium hintonii. When I first started collecting cacti and succulents, I would look at this plant in pictures and just covet it. I wanted this plant so bad. It's so rare. It's from Nuevo Leon. Comes from like these really steep canyons. They're almost always growing in a vertical wall. They live in an environment that's really hard to mimic, and so most of the people who steal these plants end up killing them. That's a really sad thing about this. So even if you see these plants for sale on eBay, and I've actually reported people, because you're not supposed to take these out of the wild anyway. There's international rules about cacti and succulents. You don't take them. You leave them alone. But I've seen people selling this stuff on eBay and stuff, and there's not a lot of regulation on eBay. So like, people are selling stuff they shouldn't be. Don't fall prey to this. First of all, you're probably going to kill it. I don't care how good of a grower you are. Some things don't belong in domesticated situations. So go out and see this plant and be amazed by it. Go to Nuevo Leon and Galena. It's got a narrow area, but if you go looking for it, people will help you find it. It's Galena, Nuevo Leon. Go see it, but don't take it. And learn how to appreciate plants with having to own them. That's a thing I've learned as I've gotten older. It's an important thing to just appreciate these guys for what they are. And you don't need to anyway. There's so many cool nurseries, not only in Tucson, but just online. You can get almost anything. And the most cactus nurseries are very, they're very moral. They're not gonna steal. They're not gonna sell plants that are rare. All the nurseries, we all police each other. If I saw any nursery selling something like selling something that was taken from the wild, we would all turn that person in. We're snitches. So, we're not going to let people do that, because it's important to, protect the plant.
And it's much more interesting when people figure out how to grow it from seed.
Yeah.
And that's when people start bragging about it.
And most of these things are already in cultivation. You can get the plants and seed from plants that came in cultivation. There's drawbacks to that. A lot of these plants are hybridized because of that. So you'll find in cacti and succulents there's all kinds of weird hybrids and stuff that don't exist in nature. But just resist the urge to steal wild plants. Cacti and succulents mostly come from these two areas of the world. And we happen to live in one of these hot spots. We're at the northern end of it there. But the southwest U.S., Mexico, down to basically about Costa Rica, Panama. But basically, like, Mexico is really the hot spot. And then, of course, South Africa and Madagascar. Those are the two hot spots for diversity in weird plants in cacti and succulents. And so a lot of the plants we're going to be talking about are from these two areas. Now, when you're growing cacti and succulents at your house in Tucson, there's going to be two basic groups of plants. One, the ones that are sort of outdoor hardy, that can grow in your landscape, either in the shade or the sun, but plants that can go in the ground and not have a lot of special attention. So these are, very common. There's a lot of plants like this, of course, because a lot of them are actually native here. And so a lot of these plants are very familiar because they're used in landscapes a lot, or they're just wild here. And then there's the plants that require a little more work and care and research. And so be aware of that, because this is another reason not to shop at Home Depot and places like that, because they sell some of these kinds of things and they're not necessarily appropriate for our climate, and or they're just difficult to grow, and they don't really tell you the difference. At Home Depot, those people don't even know how to grow a bougainvillea, let alone that caralluma, that black flowered thing there. That's Caralluma russelliana. I grew that back in the 90s. Difficult plant to grow, but really cool plant. Not too many plants have black flowers. They smell too, and just be aware. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to grow these things. You should. They're fun. But just know that you're going to have to do a little more work and research to grow these cool kinds of more tender succulents, as opposed to growing these guys, which are really easy to grow. Now, ironically, most of our cacti and succulents do really well in some shade. And the ideal shade cloth that's a really good middle ground is, between 40 and 60% shade. And so, underneath the mesquite tree is kind of nice if it's not too dense, especially the edges of the mesquite. Or you can just, set up a shade structure and make it, it's nice for you too to have that shade. But this is sort of the perfect lighting for most cacti and succulents. And now, again, always do your homework, especially if you're getting something kind of weird and sensitive looking. Do your homework and make sure you're not getting something that needs a lot more shade and you don't have that shade or whatever. Just do your homework. And there are some plants that have to have that full sun too. So just be aware of that. And watering, again, there's no one watering guideline for all cacti and succulents, but I can say this: the majority of our cacti and succulents in the summertime, you're going to be watering them about once a week. I'm talking about plants in containers, by the way. So cacti and succulents in containers are watered about once a week in the summer, and wintertime maybe once a month, and some of them not at all, depending on how big the pot is and what kind of plant it is. There are some plants that if they get winter water, they'll just croak. Now, there are other plants too that have different seasons, and so you got to pay attention to that too. If a plant is from Baja California, especially the southern end of Baja California, they get all their rain in the wintertime, and so that's why boojum trees go dormant in the summertime and they green up in the wintertime, because they are winter active growing plants. So pay attention to that too, and know the seasonality of your plants. And a lot of that has to do, again, with studying the natural habitat of the plants you're looking at. Now, as far as planting is concerned, again, always there's specific, plants that like specific things, so always do your homework. But in general, at the beginning of a plant's growing season, you can pot it up. You don't want to pot it up as much as you would pot up like a house plant or a plant that's outside, like a non-succulent plant. You want to, only bump them up a little bit, because cacti and succulents do require less, nutrition, and you do risk rotting them if you push them too fast. Now, that said, there are some plants that you can push, and you might want to push a plant. I have a love for bursaras, for example, the elephant trees, and I'll dump a tiny little bursara into a big 5-gallon pot so that I can get it real big, real fast. But I do it at the beginning of its growing season, and there's lots of plants you can do that with. There's some plants you can't. You can't push them no matter what, but there are a few that you can push. So just be aware of all those things. And again, with cacti and succulents, you're not going to learn one thing and then you know how to grow them. You have to study the rest of your life. You're going to have to always ask questions. as far as the kind of potting medium, a lot of this is not only about opinion, but it's also based on your own watering habits and your own, the kinds of plants you're growing. But in general, the general thing for cacti and succulents is that you want really good drainage. So whether they all three of these potting mixes are different. One's being mixed. That's someone mixing their own potting soil for their own plants there. But just play around, talk to the growers. They'll tell you what they do. But also just realize that it's not a one thing for everyone, because again, your habits are going to be different than someone else's habits in terms of how you grow. Are you someone who's always watching your plants, or are you someone who doesn't watch as closely? That might determine on how much drainage you'll put in your mix. You gotta play it by ear, and also again by the kinds of plants you're growing. And then fertilizer, not as important with cacti and succulents. They don't require a lot, but we always say go organic when you can. And in terms of cactus, you just don't want a lot of nutrients. You want a low number, low numbers on the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Like this is perfect, 1, 2, 2 is all you really ever need. This actually also has some beneficial microbes in it too, which is kind of cool. But don't worry too much about that. But just low numbers, not a lot of nitrogen, and if anything, boost the phosphorus. You can go to 5 or 6 on the phosphorus if you wanted to, or even more. But just you don't need to feed more than once a year with most cacti and succulents. It's not something you need to do very often, unless again you have some special goal, you're pushing a plant to grow or whatever. Definitely don't do a lot of nitrogen. So now we're just going to go through some profiles of some cool, weird plants, and we'll talk about where they're from a little bit, and also just other notes, because like I said, growing cacti and succulents is a gigantic group of plants, and they all are very different. Does someone have a question?
Yeah. Any advice on watering in extreme heat, as we've just been through?
They're asking, any advice on watering in extreme heat? So again, it all depends on what you're growing. If you're growing something that's winter dormant, summer dormant, you don't want to hardly water it at all. But sometimes you do. You don't want it to go. A lot of plants you don't want to go totally bone dry. So you got to water them a little bit lightly. But there's different schools of thought on this. Gene Joseph at Plants for the Southwest has this belief that if you let the roots go too dry, you get a lot of dieback on the roots, and then when you water it, you can get rot more easily. That's actually that's true. You are more prone to that. So but it depends. If you're growing certain mammillarias, for example, mammillaria is a type of cactus. Some mammillarias, if they even get a rumor of water in the winter time, they just rot. So as far as watering in the summer, it just depends on what you're growing. I tend to favor watering more than not. I'm a waterer, so my drainage on my cactus soil, I like really good, well-drained cactus soil. So, and then I'm very careful, of course, not to water it in its off seasons. So it depends on your soil mix. It depends on what you're growing. Some plants go dormant in the summertime, and you don't want to water them a lot. So, like I said, there's no one answer. But a lot of the times this next plant's a good lead-in for that. Like jade plants, I put this in here. I don't really like jade plants very much. I think they're kind of trash plants, but a lot of people like them. They're always at Home Depot. They don't really belong here. They do really well in like San Francisco. They love that coastal, cool climate that doesn't ever get cold, but it doesn't ever really get hot either. In San Francisco and in Oakland, jade plants are shrubs there. They're like shrubs for people's yards. So they love it there. But here they don't like it so much. And the summertime, you want to grow them in the shade, and you don't want to overwater them in the wintertime either. But it's, the big thing with jade plant is not so much the summer watering that kills them, it's the sun and the heat. So you want to put them in the coolest spot in your yard. Again, not so much shade that they get etiolated. Etiolated means when a plant gets all stretchy looking because it doesn't have enough sun. So you don't want that much shade, but like, under a mesquite, and try to find the coolest part of your yard. I know that's hard to do at this time of year. Well, today was really nice out, but the last few weeks have been miserable. Last few months have been miserable, and you're like, what cool part of my yard, right? But there are parts that are relatively cooler than the other parts, and that's where you would put your jade plant. But I put this in here because people are familiar with it. But if I was going to grow crassula, and if I was going to go through the trouble of growing a crassula, I'd grow something like this. So this is from South Africa, and I'm sorry, these are all going to be botanical names, by the way. Cacti and succulents often don't have common names, or if they do, it's in Swahili. So, so we just use the botanical names with most cacti and succulents. But yeah, this is a cool crassula. Crassula is a very diverse genus. It's a wide range of plants, almost as diverse as like euphorbias, which we'll get into. But this one, Pseudohemispherica, is just a cool, flat-looking, weird crassula. I like this one too. It looks like little turds. Crassula barclayi. Another really cool crassula. There's so many of them that are cool. These are harder to grow. They really don't like our summer heat, so they're gonna be a little bitchy in the summertime. You got to put them in a cool spot in your yard and just ease them through their summer. And the other side of that is some of them don't like it too cold either, and so you'll have to protect them from frost. That's why cacti and succulents tend to be the gateway drug for greenhouse growing. Some people go into orchids after they get into cacti and succulents. Now, don't ever go orchid. Once you go orchid, you just it's the end of your life. You think cacti and succulents people are freaks. The orchid people, that's just like going into heroin after cocaine. Just like no turning back. So, yeah, orchids. So, Crassula barclayi, cool plant. This is a graptopetalum, more distantly related to the crassulas, but this one's easy to grow, and you've probably seen it. You've probably seen it in people's yards. They don't always look as lush as this one does. Sometimes they have less leaves in the rosette because it's drier and hotter. But these actually do fairly okay considering our heat. And this in Tucson's not the ideal climate for this plant, but it does pretty well. But again, if I'm going to grow a graptopetalum, I'm going to grow the risbii, the native one. And like I said, you can get these in cultivation. Don't dig them out of the ground in the wild. But Graptopetalum risbii, I think, is a nicer plant. These ones you'll mostly grow in a shady spot in your yard, but they're not terribly difficult to grow. This guy, he's native to Arizona and then south into northern Mexico, Chihuahua, Sinaloa, Sonora. They grow kind of in rocky, cliffy areas, which is true about a lot of plants. A lot of these cacti and succulents, you'll find that most of them grow out of like really rocky soil, sometimes just out of a crack. Here's another cool plant, and again in the same kind of group of somewhat difficult to grow, but they're not that hard. Adramyscus maculatus. This is from western and eastern Cape provinces of South Africa. So it grows in sandstone, but it's just really good drainage on this one. Again, same kind of thing. Like, don't have it exposed to too much beating heat and sun in the summertime. And but pretty cool looking plant. And of course, if you want to see a really weird Adramyscus, this one's pretty cool. This is Adramyscus mariana, South Africa, southwestern Namibia. It grows out of crevices in the rocks, but this one actually grows in the shade of shrubs and stuff. So they'll form entire mats. But it's what a cool looking plant that is. It just looks like I don't know what that looks like. What do you think that looks like?
Coral.
Oh yeah, it does look. It looks like coral. Um, yeah. So I mean, some of these just don't even look like plants. Now here's 3 plants that you've probably grown one of these before. These are kalanchoe. Some people say kalanchoe, but kalanchoe. These 3 species are probably the 3 most common ones you'll see, especially that one on the right. That's kalanchoe blessfeldiana. You can find that in the grocery store or at a florist. The other 2 are plants that people share with each other. I don't know how often anyone actually buys one of these plants. Both of them are kind of referred to as mother of thousands or mother of millions because those little, as you can especially see it on the top left there, those little bits on the edges of the leaves are baby plants. Those are bulbils. And they're not bulbils. I forget what the term is for those things. But anyway, those are baby plants, and they have little roots, and you can pull those off and plant them, and they'll grow. And usually, once you get these grown in your yard, then you wish you never planted them. They'll come up everywhere. They're a little bit weedy. They're not weedy in the sense that they escape cultivation because they're just too succulent and delicious. So they would never make it in nature that way. But in your yard, they can get really weedy. Back in the day, I knew this grower who was an old guy, and he was getting kind of senile when I met him, and he never wore a belt, and he held his pants up with his one hand, and but he was a pretty good grower. But half of his nursery had been overtaken by that kalanchoe, the one on the lower left hand side. Dagramontiana, and there's I think tuberosa is another one that looks similar to that. They just take over if you don't watch it. But anyway, they're great plants for beginners. But of course, this is also a kalanchoe, and it becomes almost like a tree. Beharensis. It's just a cool trunk forming plant. These aren't terribly rare. You find them in the nurseries, but they're very cool. You just have to protect them from the frost. Now, we talked about this already. This is a plant that got me into plants, native to Mexico, by the way, and it's actually a natural hybrid between Sedum pachyphyllum and Sedum stahli, but it's been in cultivation for a long time and selected. So there's some selections that are more red than others. They also turn more red with the winter time. But this is a very common and easy to grow sedum. It actually does really well in Tucson as well. But of course, we have our own native sedum as well, and that's probably what I would prefer to grow is the Sedum cockerellii. There's a picture of it in nature there growing, and this is that picture. The big picture there is how you mostly see them just growing out of the rocks and in the canyons. Again, don't pull it. It's not rare or anything, but just it will become rare if everyone starts pulling at it. But it is in cultivation. It's easy to get a hold of some. In fact, a lot of the time you buy a succulent from some of these local nurseries, you end up with some Sedum cockerellii because they just kind of volunteer themselves. Now, euphorbias, I'm rolling through these, by the way, because there's so many of them, of these groups. I know I'm going to miss some, too, because there's just too many, and I can't do them all in one class. But we're just going to roll through them, and, feel free to fire off any questions. But, we have to roll them through them fast because I have like 100 slides. So euphorbias are a huge group of plants. Poinsettia is a euphorbia. That little spurge that's a weed that grows in your yard is a euphorbia. They're all in the same genus. It's an incredibly diverse genus. But there are a lot of succulent euphorbias, including some that look just like cacti, and others who have swollen roots under the ground. Some of them are geophytes. And there's some pachycol euphorbias. There's many euphorbias. But it's their genes that make them related, and if you start looking closely at their flowers, you understand why they're related too. But here's just a few. This is a very common plant that you probably have in your house, or you have in the past, or you know someone who has this one. People think this is a cactus. It's a euphorbia. People use this as a house plant because it's so easy to grow. In the house, you just don't water it, and it doesn't ever grow. It doesn't. If it does start to grow in the house and it doesn't have enough light, it gets etiolated again, stretched looking. But they can actually grow outside too, as long as it's not too much sun, and as long as you don't, let them be exposed to frost. And they don't, euphorbias in general, by the way, don't want they're summer growers, most of them. So they do not want a lot or any winter water. This one's one of my favorites and a pretty common plant, Euphorbia obesa, or they call it baseball plant sometimes. And that's native to the Great Karoo in northern Cape region of South Africa. Just a cool looking baseball looking plant. Those are the flowers on the top there. Just a wild looking plant. Euphorbia inermis is that Medusa-like one, although there are several Medusa-like euphorbias that kind of have the same growth pattern, but they're slightly different. But these Medusa-like euphorbias, they have a Medusa-like look to them, especially if you look from the top. The growing center's out of the middle, and as those move outward, they elongate. And eventually these get really big, and they're pretty easy to grow, but just, pretty cool looking plants. Here's a cool one, Euphorbia decidua. It's, as the name implies, it's deciduous. So this is it's got a caudex. It's actually a swollen root that's usually in nature, I believe, buried under the ground. But we expose it in cultivation usually. And in the wintertime, those leaves drop, just like any old plant, which is kind of cool for a succulent. This is native to Zimbabwe, Zambia, Zaire, etc. This plant here, I put this in here because it's a common landscape plant, and it's easy to grow in the ground. So this is one of those tough, hardy euphorbias that you can grow in your landscape. This is Euphorbia resinifera, and I think they call it Moroccan mound because it's from Morocco, and just really easy to grow euphorbia. Here's another one too that's more native, or at least native to Baja California and coastal Sonora, like near Guaymas. This is Euphorbia xanthi. And it has succulent stems. In the winter time, it goes into full bloom. It sort of grows year round, actually, in cultivation. If it has water, we have a bunch of plants of this in the nursery right now that we're propagating so we can sell it. But I got them in these 5-gallons, and I've been pushing them hard. And even in the summertime, wintertime it seems to take water year round, as long as the drainage is really good. But when it's in full bloom like that, though, it's pretty spectacular. This plant grows really fast. It is a little frost tender, so you want to put it on a south wall or cover it. But it goes down to like 25, and I think it can even go down further and still come up from the ground. I don't like to do that to plants that don't naturally have that happen to them. But anyway, Euphorbia xanthi, pretty cool plant. Related, actually, this is now, I think they've reclassified this as Euphorbia Petalanthus macrocarpus. You've probably seen this plant. This is very common in landscapes in Tucson. You can grow it in the shade or the sun. I think a little bit of shade in the afternoon makes them look a little bit better. They get kind of yellowish in the sun, but you can grow them in the full sun, and they tend to bloom really well when they're in the full sun. But then there's Petalanthus tithymaloides. This is a variegated one, which I don't really care for variegated plants. People really love them. But I like the zigzaggy nature of this plant. And these plants are all really easy to grow. This one can grow in the shade. Just a cool plant. Lithops. Lithops are so cool.
Little butts.
They are. They're. I've killed a lot of these, and they're a little bit difficult to grow. But the reason I kill them is that I actually kind of ignore them a little too much. And you're not. There's a balance with lithops.
I think I give them too much love.
And you give them too much love, yes. And so here's the tips for lithops, and this will help you a little bit. If you've killed a lot of these, don't feel bad. We've all done it. But here's the thing. Well, first of all, you know those pictures? I think I had a picture in the beginning of the lithops with every different color in one bowl. Don't do that. Give them room to grow. I know that makes a great Instagram picture, but it's stupid. So don't do that. But anyway, so here are the keys to watering lithops. One, water them from late spring into summer. That's when they start growing. When the plant starts to go dormant in the summertime, you stop watering. If they go totally shrivelly, you might just barely water the top of the soil. But don't. If you're in doubt, don't water it. And then in the late summer, they begin to grow again. Late summer to early fall, so start watering them again. And then stop watering in the wintertime. Now, the wintertime, I think, is when they exchange their leaves out. So if you look in the progression in this picture, at the left, you have, the new leaves are trying to push out of the old leaves. One of the mistakes people make is when that's happening, they water it, and those old leaves don't shrivel, and the new leaves in the middle just they get squeezed, and then they die. So in nature, they're not getting a lot of rain. So the old leaves shrivel up, and as this picture goes to the left, you can see how it's actually one of those pictures is out of order. But anyway, you can see how it's progressively shriveling up to allow the new leaves to come through. So you want to let that happen. And that's something to watch for. When you see the new leaves coming out of the middle, and that I think that's usually in the winter time, don't water it during that time. And let it do its thing. What it's doing is it's sucking the water out of the old leaves and putting them into the new ones. So if you're watering the plant, they won't suck the water out of the old leaves. They'll just use the water that's available in the pot. So don't do that. Let it do its thing. That's a basic thing with lithops and conophytum and all those other plants that look like, they call them living stones. That's the general rule about that. And if you have any, if you want to talk to somebody who really knows their living stones, go to Living Stones Nursery. It's also known as Plants for the Southwest. They're on Blackledge and Stone, and they have more varieties of lithops than mostly anywhere else in the world. So those guys know lithops, so they can give you the right instructions. And I'm giving you some general instructions, but no, I've killed a lot of these. Even Mark Demet's killed a lot of them, and he's a world-class plant grower. One of the last times I talked to him about lithops, he was like, I hate those things. I'm so sick of ruining them. And also know that some of these types of plants aren't meant to live long either. And I'll mention some of those. Lithops are some of those species of lithops aren't meant to live that long. So just be aware of that and accept it, because it's just like having an annual, like a wildflower. Stapelia gigantea. You've seen this in Tucson probably. It's a cool plant. It's a milkweed, believe it or not. And I think I've read that even that it's been used as a larval food plant for monarchs before, which I can't quite picture. But I never saw them eating. I couldn't imagine them eating Asclepias subulata, the desert milkweed, either. But I've seen them do it now, and they just chomp right down. So, but anyway, this is a milkweed. It's a succulent milkweed. And it's native to South Africa, and smells like rotten meat. This actually grows really well in the ground in the shade, and even a little sun is fine. But it's just a really easy plant to grow. but if you want to grow something more challenging that's in the same group, you might try something that, well, this is really challenging. Caralluma socotrana. That does not want any water in the wintertime. It'll just croak. And this plant is one of those plants that don't live long. So you have to work so hard on growing this amazing looking plant and then have your heart broken because it doesn't live long. But it's worth it. Look at that thing. It's so cool looking. Just such a weird, dead looking plant with a weird, rotten smelling flower. Actually, I can't remember how this one smells. But I'm pretty sure it smells not good. Most of the plants in this group, this Apocynaceae, it's a milkweed family, but these succulent milkweeds often don't smell good. The flowers, they only smell when they're blooming. By the way, they smell like carrion to attract flies, and the flies pollinate the plants. There's another one in that group, Duvalia corduroyi. That one just has that really amazing looking flower. Again, kind of a tricky plant to grow. In general, like these stapeliid milkweeds don't want a lot of they don't want any or very little winter rain. So if it's raining too much in the wintertime, you're going to have to cover some of these plants. Speaking of plants that don't like winter rain, adeniums. A little easier to grow, this one. The adeniums are very popular now. There's lots of hybrids out there that are bred not only to be easy to be grown, but also, in the case of Mark Demmett, who's a breeder of these, he wants a big red flower. Some people think these are just succulent oleanders, and I tend to agree because that's pretty much what they are. By the way, this is Apocynaceae too. So Apocynaceae used to be separate from the milkweeds. The milkweeds were the Asclepiadaceae, but now milkweeds and Apocynaceae are all in the same family. So this is basically kind of like a milkweed, but it's closer to being like an oleander. Which doesn't really sell it well, right? Like, who wants a oleander? But this one's a succulent oleander, and it looks cool. But especially if you grow something like Adenium socotraneum from the island of Socotra in the Indian Ocean. That is a cool plant. Like, who cares if it's related to oleanders? Look at that thing. It's really cool. It's like if oleander went out and got a life.
Dang.
Adenium socotraneum. This one's a little hard to grow. Adeniums, so the hybrids and the ones that are very common in the trade, even they can easily rot in the wintertime if you water them, if you water them at all in the wintertime. But in the summertime, they grow really fast and you can water them a lot. Adenium socotraneum, man, you just have to be careful with that year round, but especially in the wintertime, don't even let it think about water. But what a cool plant. It takes a long time for them to look like this. These are them in habitat, but these plants, I've seen some plants get pretty big in cultivation as well. But this one you have to be a little bit careful with. Pachypodiums. So these are all mostly from Madagascar. They call it the Madagascar palm sometimes. This is the common one, Pachypodium lameri. Easy to grow and just a cool plant. Again, do a little searching and hunting around for some nurseries, and you might find something like this. There's a lot of Pachypodiums, and they all look a little different. So play around and look for the cool ones, and also, of course, ask questions. What does this thing want? In the case of Pachypodiums, they're frost tender, and they also don't like very much winter precipitation, so keep them dry in the wintertime. They can be pushed fairly quickly in the growing season. This thing is cool. I've always loved these things. This is one of the more common of this genus, Dioscorea elephantypes. Elephant's food, or Hottentot bread, they call it. It's basically a yam, and looks like a turtle shell. It's a vine, so it goes dormant, but it grows a vine out of the top of that thing, and then it goes dormant in the wintertime. Was there a question?
No.
Oh. But yeah, look at that thing. Just a cool codex on that. But here's a little bit more of a rare Dioscorea, but it just gives you a little bit of an idea of the diversity in these things. This one is from Brazil. I can't remember. Oh, this one's from South Africa. So that's South Africa. This is New World. This is Brazil. Here's one that's native not far from here. This is from Sonora in Baja California. That's Ibervillea sonori. That's a giant caudex, and then there's a vine on top. Often you'll see the plants vining up into shrubs. The one that we have in Arizona, actually, we have an Ibervillea. We have tenuous secta, which looks very similar. Doesn't as easily form that round caudex, and you do have to unearth it a little bit more than the sonori. But otherwise, similar growing pattern. No winter rain. You can plant this in the ground, by the way, because it is native close enough to here. But just watch that winter precipitation and really good, well-drained soil. These grow really fast in the warm season, and they're vines. So give those vines somewhere to grow. We have ours on our patio right now, and it vines up with we have like several vines kind of meshed in with each other, growing up together. It's mixed up with some milkweed vines and some other things, but it'll go dormant in the wintertime. You telling me to drink my beer?
Yeah. Take a break.
Take a break. Take a breather.
Get some air.
All right.
Oh, wait. How big is that plant?
How big is that plant?
Which plant?
Probably the Ibervillea tenuous secta. Well, the first one, they both get really big. Sonori gets a little bigger. I think they can get as big as, like, I've seen them at least almost 2 feet wide.
The caudex?
Yeah, the caudex.
Yeah.
And I think they can even get a little bigger than that. But tenuous secta is a little bit smaller, but it still gets pretty big. The biggest I've seen of these is probably about a foot, maybe a little over a foot. But they could probably get bigger. Yeah, so, and there's a lot of, I'm just scratching the surface. Every one of these plant groups that I'm talking about, like, there's a ton of vining. These are cucurbits, by the way. These are both Ibervilleas here are in the Cucurbitaceae, so they're cucumbers. They're succulent cucumbers, perennial succulent cucumbers. And there are a ton of caudex-forming cucurbits. So how cool is that? These are just 2 species that happen to be native close to us. We have one Tumamoka mcdougallii, which used to be native in the Tucson Mountains. It still is, but it's very rare now. And I'm not sure what its demise was, but it's very rare now. And I think there still might be a couple plants on Tumamoka Hill, but and throughout the Tucson Mountains. But it also has somewhat of a caudex. It's a much smaller plant, but there's a lot of these caudex-forming cucurbits. Here's a weirdo that I just started growing, and I don't know if mine's alive right now. So yeah, learn to accept failure. Mine didn't come out of winter very well, and it grew some leaves, and then it gave up again. But it's not dead. It's still solid. It hasn't rotted, so I'm being very careful with it. Anyway, this is in a weird plant family, the Icacinaceae, which I don't know anything about this plant family. But it's from Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania. And it's just another one of those caudex viney plants, but it's not a cucurbit. It's in its own weird family. I think I looked up that family once before, but I just didn't really know any of the plants in that family. But they call it monkey chair, I think, because these things can get really big. I've seen pictures of these that are as big as like boulders. Like they look like giant boulders. Yeah, monkey throne or monkey chair, they call it. Anyway, I'll tell you after this year more about how to grow it. So far, I haven't quite figured it out. Um, Adenias are really cool. In the beginning, there was a passing picture of Adenia glauca. This is Adenia globosa, though. This is the passion flower family. So this is a succulent passion flower. How weird is that? Um, and it's from tropical Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia. It's got a little tiny passion flower-like flower. We have a Adenia glauca that bloomed recently, actually, and I took a picture and I forgot to show you. It was a little green-looking passion flower. Not as quite as intricate as passion flower, but what a weird plant that is, right? Who wouldn't want to grow that? Adenias are fairly easy to grow. They're winter dormant, just good drainage, but not too much drainage. Globosa, a little bit more drainage, but like glauca, they can grow that pretty easily. This weird plant is basically a succulent grape that doesn't vine, Cyphostemma jatea. So it's a grape. Those weird, thick, succulent leaves drop in the wintertime, so you don't water it in the winter very much, if at all. And those trunks can get giant. In nature, they can get, I think, 6 or 8 feet tall or even bigger. And there's several species of Cyphostemma, and they're all weird and succulent like this. I would call that a caudiciform with succulent leaves. But very cool plant. Sometimes, Mark Demmett actually had one of these years ago where the middle had kind of rotted out a little bit, but the plant was still alive. So there was nothing wrong with the plant, just part of it in the middle kind of like rotted, and then it dried out. So there was this hole in the middle of it. It looked like a little hobbit house, and he kept talking about putting a door on it. I don't think he ever did put a door on it, but yeah, it's a cool plant. Dorstinia fetida. This is the most common one. This one can actually get kind of weedy. Once you start growing this, it'll start coming up in other pots. That's an inside-out fig. This is a fig. How weird is that? These look like little succulent palms, basically. They're not terribly big, usually only about a foot tall, or some species can get, up to 3 feet or so, I think. And some are a little harder to grow than others. They're frost tender, so you want to protect them from frost and not water them very much in the winter time. But they have those weird sun-looking, looks like a weird sun that is drawn by, who's the guy that does Beetlejuice in all those movies? What's his name?
Tim Burton.
It looks like a Tim Burton sun. But it's an inside-out fig, basically. Especially those little seeds that are in the middle that develop. They look just like fig seeds. So it's really obvious on how they're related. That's from Eastern Africa and Arabia. Bursera, microphylla. So there's many species of Bursera. They're all New World, but it's the frankincense family, so it's related to frankincense, which is the Old World. Old World Burseras are basically Boswellia and Commiphora, and they're frankincense, like from the Bible, for those of you who read that or have read it. And this is our New World version of it. They get these peeling, glossy trunks. I put this one in here because it's native to Arizona. And so you can find this in places like Oregon Pipe National Monument. Actually, Bursera microphylla has it's all along the border. Wherever it's not too cold, you'll find it. And even as far as, I forget how far north it gets, but anywhere where there's fairly frost-free zone, or some frost and they get frozen back and they grow back from it. They used to be more common back when it was more tropical here, and this is a tropical remnant. But it's just a lovely favorite plant of mine. They call it elephant tree sometimes, but there's other bursters that get more peely on the trunks and even fatter trunks. And in Sonora and in Baja California, where this also grows, they get even bigger and fatter. They have this resinous smell that I cannot describe. You just have to smell it, almost like fuel, but in a pleasant way, almost like lemony gasoline. It's a really cool plant. Many species of Bursera. Some of them have almost like shiny blue trunks. Very cool genus. Easy to grow. Jatropha cuneata. We have 4 species of Jatropha in Arizona. Cuneata, cinerea, cordata, and macrorrhiza. Did I miss one? Cardiophila, cuneata, cinerea, and macrorrhiza. Yeah, I think that's it. Anyway, this one, you find this guy in Oregon Pipe National Monument. By the way, just for cool plants, go to Oregon Pipe National Monument. Very cool plants. It's like Sonora burped up into Arizona a little bit. But the pictures don't ever do this plant justice. But when you go see them in nature, you're like, what is that weird? It's kind of like an ocotillo, but it's a little more succulent, and it's like it has red fall leaves, weird euphorbia-like fruits because it is in the Euphorbiaceae. Jatropha is a very big genus in the Euphorbiaceae, and it's very different. All the different species. Jatropha macrorrhiza is a deciduous leafy plant that forms a giant woody caudex under the ground. So it's a geophyte, and it's as different as that. Or the one that's native right in your area here. If you go up into the foothills, you'll find Jatropha cardiophila, and that one just looks like dead rubber stems for most of the year, and then the last thing to wake up in the May usually is Jatropha cardiophila. The leaves come out. It's got little leathery looking gray leaves, and it suckers. So they're all very different. This one doesn't sucker. It's more of a like I said, a cross between an ocotillo and a bursera or something like that. Cool plant. I love this plant. We actually, I think, have a few for sale. It's like 5-gallon size. Frost tender, so you got to protect them. Pachycormus discolor looks like a bursera almost. This weirdo grows in the wintertime and is dormant in the summertime, a lot like a lot of other plants that come from Baja California. This it's in the cashew family, the Anacardaceae, and this is the only species in the genus. But this is a little tiny guy, but they get big fat trunks like most of the elephant trees do. What is he eating?
I don't know.
Our cat's eating something he shouldn't eat. Here's another winter active grower. You've seen this before, I'm sure. This is the boojum tree. This is related to ocotillo. Some people don't know that. This is an ocotillo, but it's a different species, Fukiera columnaris. So winter active, summer dormant. In the summertime, you want to just barely water them once in a while. You don't want to overwater them in the summer, or else they'll rot, especially as they get older. I had some seedlings that I've been bringing through the summer, and they never dropped their leaves, and they've continued to grow. So I've cautiously watered them through that season. So sometimes you just have to follow the plant's lead. But as they get older, they'll be more prone to rotting if they're dormant. Our bigger one just woke up, actually. That one rain we had, what was that, a week ago?
Yeah. About
a week ago. It leafed out, and so I gave it a little water, but I'm still being cautious. But anyway, that's on the right there is what it often looks like in our pots or in landscapes in Tucson. They actually could take some frost. They can go down to I think 20 degrees or so. They'll get a little stem damage, but they come back from it. There's some magnificent large plants at the Boyce Thompson Arboretum, and actually at the Desert Museum too. There's some big ones. Cool plant. But here's another one that Another Fukiaria that you may not have seen, or if you're a collector, you might have seen it. This is a highly sought after plant and still expensive. God, back in the 90s, it was expensive, and you see them in the nurseries now, and they're still expensive. But man, how cool is that plant, though? This is Fukiaria purpussii from Puebla in Oaxaca. Um, just kind of rare in the trade, but when you find them, grab them. They're not hard to grow. Grow them like any other ocotillo relative. Most of the ocotillo plants are pretty easy to grow, with the exception of the boojum tree. Most of them are more summer growing. So and you can actually water them pretty well in the summer, and they just grow faster. But keep them fed. If you feed them, they'll grow faster and they'll look a little better. They won't get all yellow looking. This massive, amazing, giant thing. I'll never get tired of baobabs. One of the only succulents, by the way, I forget what species they have in Australia, but Australia has a very weird lack of succulents. And I don't know why that is, but they have other things, but they don't have very many succulents. But they do have a baobab, I believe. This is not that one. This is Adansonia digitata from Africa, very widespread in Africa. They're some of the biggest plants in the world. You can grow these. We have one here in a 5-gallon. There's one on campus, by the way. Just to the east of, what's the food area called? The food area.
The food court.
The food court.
Student union.
Yeah, just to the east of it, there's one up against the building, and it's been there for years. It got a little frost damage a few years ago, but it's still going. It doesn't look anything like they normally look, but this is an unusually large one that's had some damage in its past. But what an incredible looking plant that is. It's such a cool plant. This is another plant you can find on campus. So these are pachycalls. This is Ceiba insignis, or formerly Coresia insignis. This is one of the kapok trees. The one that you might have seen a little more often is the pink flowered one, Ceiba speciosa. But insignis, I just put this one in here because it's a little hardier to the cold than speciosa is. You can grow both of them here. There's one on campus that's west of Student Union, actually just west and north of the old main, and it's got its belly, so that it forms that big belly in the bottom. They have those Hershey Kiss thorns and giant daylily looking flowers, and then they produce kapok, that cottony stuff that they used to stuff life preservers with, and pillows and stuff. I think it's Ceiba pentandra, which is the more commonly used species for kapok, but there's several species of Ceiba. We have one in Sonora just south of the border, Ceiba acuminata. But anyway, cool plant. Easy to grow. Like, why wouldn't you want a big fat plant with a daylily looking flower, Hershey Kiss thorns, and a fat belly with a green trunk? It's cool.
Does kapok form the belly too?
Yeah, most of the Ceibas do have some kind of belly, but I think insignis forms it sooner. And so if you want the belly sooner, I'd go for the insignis. Also because of the fact that it's hardier to the cold. This guy can go down into the 20s and be all okay. Whereas speciosa and pentandra, a little bit of frost and they get damaged pretty hard. You can cover them, and people do. I grew some plants back in the 90s that were accidental hybrids between insignis and speciosa. And how do I know that? I collected the seeds off the insignis on campus, and the flowers came out pink. And why was that? Because there's a speciosa right next to it. So they hybridized, and we called it, back in the day, we called it pink and tough. And there's actually a few plants around town. If you go in the Barrio Viejo, and off of, I forget the name of that road. I planted a tree back in the 90s, and it's now it basically is as high as the rooftop. The stems on the top always freeze back in the wintertime, or most winters they'll get some frost damage. But that plant has got its belly already, and it's huge. I can't believe I planted that thing. Yeah, and then I have a couple friends who have planted them in their yards. Anyway, this of course is a very common plant, aloe vera. It used to be called Aloe barbadensis from the Arabian Peninsula. But there are a lot of aloes that you can grow. By the way, some people think they have aloe vera, but they have aloe maculata. This was formerly known as aloe saponaria. This is actually a lot more common in Tucson, and it often looks like that. It has like the brown tips like that, and it's a little more stripy. That is aloe saponaria or aloe maculata, and it still has it's still aloe-like, and in that it's like good for burns and all that. But this one spreads a lot faster, and it's just more common in Tucson. But there's a lot of these too around. Aloe vera is a lot more fleshy looking. Often it's brownish or tannish colored, not this green. They vary depending on how happy they are, how much food they've had, how much water. Aloes are pretty easy to grow, except that they get that weird mite that's pretty impossible to avoid. The mite makes that weird cancer-looking growth on it. That's kind of why I've gotten away from loving aloes that much, because it's almost impossible to avoid, and I don't use pesticides, so I'm not going to bother with that. But look at this cool thing, right? That looks pretty innocuous, right? This is aloe dichotoma. Actually, now it's called Aleodendron dichotomum, and this little tiny thing turns into that. Aloes. So, I mean, to me, this is amazing. It amazed me when I first found out that their leaves are aloe leaves. I mean, how amazing is that? Like, I don't know how anyone could get tired of this. How cacti and succulents just do the weirdest things, and I'm never bored by them. But yeah, some aloe species become trees with big, fat. Of course, you got to protect them from frost to get them that big. But some of the aloes are surprisingly hardy. A lot of aloe species don't like our summers that much, though. So, if you have a courtyard that's nice and cool and it's also protected from the frost, it's a good spot to put something like this. This one's a little easier to grow in Tucson. Aloe ferox still develops a trunk and gets tree-like, and it has pretty amazing-looking blooms. I've seen a lot of these around town. Well, a lot. I've seen them here and there. But it's another aloe. In the same family is Haworthia mutica, and you might have seen this. This is a very relatively common plant in containers in people's backyards. Fairly easy grow. This is a winter grower, so it's more active in the wintertime, and then you're gonna like hold back water a little bit in the summer. I like to put them like under a table or something where they can cool off in the summertime, but they get a little bit of drip from above. So a little moisture isn't going to kill them, and you don't want them to go bone dry, but you don't want to thoroughly water them either. But they're not hard to grow, and people who know less than I do really well with Haworthias. So I recommend them, and they're cool looking. They have those little windows in the wings, windows in the leaves. And some of them are more so than others. This is probably my favorite Haworthia, and easy to grow. Haworthia truncata. They call it horse's tooth, which is that's the first time I saw that common name today, that made me laugh. I love it. But yeah, what a cool plant that is. And again, a good plant for someone who's just crossing over from real basic succulents into cool and unusual succulents. Another one that you'll see in a lot of people's backyards and is relatively easy to grow is gasterias. This is the common Carionata, native to South Africa. Most of the gasterias are. They grow a lot like aloes. They don't tend to. I don't recall these ever getting the mite. So if you like aloes but you don't like having those stupid mites, Grow gasterias instead. Gasterias, I think, are a little cooler too. I don't know of any gasteria trees though. They're all kind of smaller plants, but there's a lot of them and a lot of hybrids. And there's all these weird bulbs. So this is Gethyllis villosa, and it's an amarylid family, so same family as Amaryllis. There's about 33 species, and South African, dormant in the summertime, active in the wintertime. A lot of these bulbs are winter active because they come from areas where you get more winter precipitation, like this guy. Bufanis are so cool. I've overwatered these in the summertime before, and it's a heartbreaker. But just such cool plants. And some of these bulbous plants, they can be a little bit of a challenge to grow. Again, Gene Joseph and Jane Evans over at Plants for the Southwest, they grow these guys. So you want to get some good advice on how to grow these, talk to them. But they grow a lot of these kind of bulbous things. Look at this thing, Masonia depressa. They're not always as flat as this one is, but this is the goal of every Masonia grower, is to get them to look like that. How cool is that? It's such a cool plant. Again, this is a winter grower. Another one, winter grower, albuca. And if I remember right, this is an onion, which is kind of obvious, right? But look at those curlicue leaves. That's such an amazing plant. It's amazing that these things occur in nature. That's the thing I'm always reminded of when I see these things. One of the most magnificent plants in the world and the weirdest in the world is Welwitschia mirabilis. And if you've ever taken a botany class, they've probably talked about this because it's a evolutionary remnant. There's nothing even close to related to it anymore. Basically, it grows 2 leaves, and that's all it ever grows. That one on the top right that looks like just a massive pile of seaweed that washed up on the shore. That's a desert, by the way. Those are 2 leaves that have just frayed over the years, and somewhere under there's a big fat caudex. This is a conifer, so it's the closest living relatives are going to be pine trees and cycads. But there's on the right there is what you'll often see when people are growing them. They'll grow them up in a pot where the leaves can grow down and display. And they're dioecious, by the way. There's male and females. So if you're trying to get the seed out of them, you want to try to get a male and female. They're kind of hard to find and expensive when you find them, but they're worth it. They're so cool. Summer grower, not particularly hard to grow, just hard to get a hold of. But just an amazing, weird plant, and just one of the weirdest plants out there. I haven't talked about a lot of cactus lately, for this class, so we're going to go through some cactus, and of course I'm going to show you the weirdest ones. This is Leuchtenbergia principis, the agave cactus, native to north central Mexico. Those are all tubercles. So if if you can picture a mammillaria, and you know how the mammillarias have the little bumps, well, imagine those little bumps really elongated. That's what that is. But they look like little agaves almost. I love that plant. And they can get pretty big too. This is a little guy. There's a whole bunch of plants called Areocarpus. They're these star-shaped cacti. That's a true cactus. That's not a succulent. I mean, it is a succulent, but it's not a non-cactus succulent. It's a true cactus with areoles and all that. But it's again, those are tubercles that have evolved to stick out like that. And in this case, this one's pretty flat. That's Areocarpus cuchibayanus. It's a particular variety. There's a lot of selections and varieties on these. Some of them are found in nature, but some of them are just selections that they've bred in captivity. Sometimes they're hybrid, or sometimes just a sport that someone grew out. But that's a cool plant. I love Areocarpus a lot. Obergonia derangii, or denegrii. And this is an old school popular weirdo, like an artichoke almost. And it's from Mexico. Those are the tubercles that are extended out. People get into the crested plants. This is actually a prickly pear, but it crested. And almost any cactus can crest. What it is I think there's some damage to the meristem or something that causes the cresting, and it's almost like cancer. It replicates growth in a way that's not according to the genetic code, and you get these weird growth patterns. So yeah, that's a prickly pear. That's a pad that just keeps folding over itself. And you've seen the crested saguaros, I'm sure. Those are pretty well known. But almost any cactus can crest. Here's mellow cactus. We had a picture of one of these in the beginning. Gets that little cap on the top. They call it Turk's cap. And this is from a Cuban province. Province just north of Cuba. Matanzas. I don't know that place. But anyway, that's where the species is from. And it grows all the way down into South America. There's a lot of them down there. That's I think called a cephalium on the top. That's where all the flowers and fruits come out on the top. That thing on the top just keeps growing. And some of them are yellow, some of them are red or brown. They have different colored mellow cacti. I had a thing for these guys back in the day. This is just one species of Turbinocarpus. All the Turbinocarpus are really tiny cacti. Some of the smallest cacti in the world. They don't get very big at all. And I loved collecting these little guys. I remember I kept finding my I had a pot full of them, and I had found them every morning thrown on the ground. And I actually was blaming a coworker because I had my plants at work. And I was like, why is that jerk pulling my plants out and throwing them on the ground? And then I found it was like I was blaming my coworker, but it was a thrasher. The thrashers love to pull these out. And I don't know what they're doing. I think they're looking for grubs or like insects or something, but they throw the cactus out of their way. But anyway, Turbinocarpus are cool. This one has that very unusual looking aerial, which is where the spines come out of, and unusual spination. Astrophytums. There's a lot of them. There's the bishop's cap is the most common one, which I don't have a picture of here. I probably should have put that in here, but you probably already know what that one is. But particularly in Japan, they've been breeding the heck out of these and making them do weirdo things like this particular selection. So there's a lot of them. They usually have yellow flowers, sometimes orange or red flowers, but they're very cool plants and particularly relatively easy to grow. You'll sometimes find some of these. The ones that are harder to grow, they'll graft them onto a rootstock of another cactus. This is the one everyone was asking me about because we had it on the picture for the class. That is a Tephrocarpus. We've got one of these. Ours is not as displayed as nicely as this one is. Some of these cactus freaks are like, they're meticulous in how they display their plants, and they spend a lot of money on pottery and stuff. But yeah, just a cool looking plant. This is native to Argentina. There's several different Tephrocarpus. The one you probably know that's a little more common has the paper spines. They call it paper spine cactus. That's related to this one. But this one just has that unusual looking, it looks like cells or something. Another cactus, Ubomania pectinifera, can be kind of challenging to grow. Not really, but it's always been reputed to be kind of challenging to grow. Just a cool looking cactus, yellow flowers. It's very threatened in nature. So, don't get one that's been poached, but I don't think people poach these very often anymore. I don't even know if there's any natural ones to poach anymore. Most of the loss has been from habitat loss. This one kind of looks like that Turbinocarpus, but even a little more so. This is Pellicophora acelliformis, or hatchet cactus. This is from San Luis Potosi. Mexico, and just one of those plants that cactus growers really love. You probably have this in your yard, or you know someone who does. Trichocereus or Echinopsis hybrids, giant flowers. The flower lasts a day, but the flowering can last a few weeks depending on how many flowers come on a plant. When they bloom, it's out of this world. This is the most popular one of these, flying saucer. But Mark Demmett used to breed these too. I bring him up a lot, but he's bred a lot of these plants, and of course his goal is the giant red flower. I got to put some agaves in here, just a few easy to find and grow ones. This is agave macroacantha, really cool smaller agave. Here's agave palmeri, variety truncata. This particular one, so palmeri is native all over, Arizona, New Mexico, south into northern Mexico. But this particular one's from Durango, and has a really neat artichoke-looking form to it, and they sucker out and everything.
That's
Question.
Perrii.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Perrii variety truncata. That's a typo. I always do that. Perrii variety truncata. Thank you. Mm-hmm. You always catch that. This agave was not even known until the 1990s. It wasn't even described, and described means that it was named and described in literature until 2007. But this is agave albipilosa. Hard to get, expensive to get. There are some selections that select for more of those cottony tips like that. But it's an agave that grows out of sheer rock, and it's from Nuevo Leon. You'll find it grown with squid agave bracteosa, and then agave Victoria Regina. But this one's very rare, and like I said, it's only been known from cultivation. It's only been known about at all for only a few decades. Most agaves were known, as soon as the Spanish came to the New World. But there's a few that have eluded everyone until recently. And how incredible is it? Something that looks like that eluded people. Like, what were you doing that you didn't notice that thing? Pretty incredible looking plant. They just weren't in the area. It'd be weird to talk about cactus and not bring up Pereschia. Pereschia is a primitive cactus. So you're looking at evolution of cacti before they became like the barrel cactus that you might be more familiar with. The first evolutionary trait was to get succulent and to develop areoles, which are where the thorns emerge from, the thorns being modified leaves. And over eons and eons of time and selection, they would drop the leaves, but the flowers would look somewhat similar. Cactus flowers are all pretty magnificent. They rival roses. I think they're prettier than roses. But Pereschia is a primitive group, and there's other primitive genera. This is the biggest one, but there's Pereschiopsis, Myhunia, Chiabentia, and Austrocylindropuntia. Some of the other primitive cactus. Yeah. Evolutionary remnants. And of course, I had to put in a chimera, because why not? This chimera is it's a weird thing when two totally different species, and in this case, totally different genera. So the same family, Cactaceae, but different genus, kind of melded together. Their meristems got mixed up together, and now they're growing as one plant, but they are two. So there's two different species. One's a Gymnocalycium and one's a Myrtillocactus. So they call it Myrtillocalicium. But it just looks like a nightmare. And like, who doesn't want a nightmare in their cactus collection? I do. I don't have a chimera yet. There's a guy whose name, there's a guy who grows these kinds of plants in Tucson, and his name just fell out of my head. Maybe I'll post it in somewhere later. But there are people who grow this kind of thing. They kind of specialize in crested plants and then weirdos like these chimeras. Um, yeah, and this is a bigeneric chimera, so it's very unusual. Anyway, finally, the end of my slideshow here. I just want to say that this is a terrible habit to get into, and anyone who's getting into this, I'm going to warn your spouse. I'm sorry for the habit that I might be encouraging here. It's a terrible, awful habit. You'll spend all your money. You'll start not paying attention to people. It's an awful habit, and so yeah, just that warning about cacti and succulents. It's a lifetime habit, right?
Yes, it's addicting.
It's addicting, and I just scratched the surface with that slideshow. That was 108 slides, I think, 104 slides, and we barely scratched the surface. It was really hard to not talk about other things. There's a succulent gesneriad that I wanted to talk about. I forgot. Gesneriads are just a group of tropical plants that are usually like delicate tropical plants, but there's a codex forming one that I forgot. But anyway, I forgot plenty of things in there. And I didn't focus on just natives on purpose because I wanted you to see the choices out there. There's not very many succulents or cactus that are weeds in our area. I can't even think of one. Most of the time, succulents are too edible to become escapees. So as someone who really loves natives, I try not to encourage too much exotic plant growing, but this is one of the times that I break that rule because they're cool. Because botany's cool.
Take a sip.
I'm going to take a sip of my beer. Did you have any announcements?
Somebody wants to know what the watering schedule for Euphorbia xanthii. Do you water it year round?
It's not particularly picky. So, yeah, you can water it year round. The key thing on that, and that one you can put in the ground. So container or ground is fine. If I put them in a container, I put them in a big container because the bigger they get, the more magnificent that bloom is. They don't tend to care too much. It's just about drainage. And I'm pretty sure they're actually one of the only euphorbias that I know of that I actually grow in the winter. But I'm not sure if they're growing in the winter or they just bloom in the winter. But I know that they don't rot, and most euphorbias do. So it's just an easy plant to grow. Just again, like really good drainage. If you put it in the ground, just make sure it's not an area where the water sticks around a lot. But you may never have to think about watering it too often if it's in the ground. Maybe once in a while. But it doesn't require a lot of water, but it doesn't seem to be too whiny if it does get it. So, yeah, that's a great one.
Somebody asked what would be the best month or months to visit Organ Pipe. I said spring.
Yeah, Organ Pipe National Monument's one of our favorite areas. There's bursaras, there's jatropha's, there's the Organ Pipes, there's, what's the other one?
Sonita. Yeah,
Sonita, Lophoceros. There's, and then even the native plants that are there are cool. There's the Sebastiania biloculari, which is the northern species of Mexican jumping bean. It doesn't do the jumping thing that the ones in Mexico do, but it's a Euphorbiaceae shrub that's in the foothills there. There's 3 species of Jatropha there, Cardiophila, Cuniata, and Cinerea. Just the one bursara. By the way, there's really only one bursara in Arizona, the elephant tree, but there is in the Waterman Mountains, there's a weirdo that they think is probably a hybrid. It looks like Bursara microphila, but it's got like a bigger leaf. And it could be that Phageroides is the hybrid, the other parent in that population. But it's just that one population in the Watermans. And then historically, Bursera phagoroides was in the Bavakivries, but no one's seen it since, gosh, it was like the early 1900s. I think it was the last time it was seen. So it probably froze, and maybe they didn't come back, or maybe they're there and no one's seen them yet. It happens to be native to an area that's sacred to the Tohono O'odham, so don't be disrespectful. Maybe if you get invited by someone who's Tohono O'odham to visit that part of the Bavakivries, then you can go and maybe look for that bursar and see if it's around. That's something I actually want to do, but I don't want to go there uninvited because it's sacred. That land's sacred to them. So anyway, there used to be a Bursera phagoroides, which has a bigger leaf and kind of almost a bluish trunk when they get big. And then you get into Sonora, and there's many species in Sonora, and some of them grow out in the thorn scrub and the drier, deserty areas, and then some of them grow in the tropical deciduous forest as an understory. There's a lot of cool bursaras. They all get really cool, glossy-looking, peely trunks, and most of them have an amazing aroma to the leaves. I'm a big fan of bursaras. Bursaras and Jatropha's were my obsession in the 90s. And now, still. All right.
That's it.
We did cactus and succulents.
The speedy version.
Speedy version. Whew. It was really hard to put this class together and to limit it because there are so many cool cacti and succulents. So it's a big topic, big world, and it's endless. Go visit those nurseries, Arid Lands, Plants for the Southwest, Box, B&B, and just, and there's more, join the Cactus and Succulent Society too, and go to their meetings there. It's a bunch of old nerds, and it's mostly old white dudes, but let's change that. Let's make it not just old white dudes.
Go on the rescues, the cactus rescues.
They have cactus rescues where you can go when they're about to bulldoze an area, and they gather up all the cacti and succulents that are growing in the area so that they're not just bulldozed, and then they find homes for them. It's not as good as stopping the development, but at least those cactus and succulents are preserved. The meetings are really cool. They're nerdy as hell. But if you're watching this, you're into it.
They're probably not doing meetings right now.
Oh yeah, COVID.
But become a member and support them so you can go to their meetings hopefully next year.
Yeah.
Or whenever.
And the people who belong to the Cactus and Succulent Society group, they've all lived here forever. A lot of them are the nursery owners. They all have a lot of information to share. They're all very approachable, and they love talking about plants. So you can pick their brains and say, Gene Joseph, help me grow lithops. And you can go to their nursery and ask them too, of course. And there's other plant nerds too who don't necessarily have nurseries, but they've been expert growers, like Mark Dimmitt, who does who over the years I've seen him do many talks for the Cactus and Succulent Society or even the Arizona Native Plant Society. So be a geek and join the societies and learn more about all those plants. Go visit the two best cactus and succulent collections that you can visit right now are the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. There's a lot of the cool stuff that we're talking about. Of course, New World, Sonoran Desert, Sonora, Arizona. But they got boojum trees, they got bursaras, and big fat elephant trees there. So go there. The Desert Botanical Gardens in Phoenix has a really good cactus and succulent collection too. And then a lot of these nurseries have their own collection that they love to flaunt in front of you and say, it's not for sale, but isn't it cool? And it's cool to see some of these plants that you don't get to see in person. So, go visit those places. And there's lots of books. This is the one book I like. You got to be careful about the books because can you go get the Arizona Cactus book? It's somewhere on there.
Oh, maybe.
Katie's going to go grab the Cactus and Succulent Society, or members of the Cactus and Succulent Society put out a book on the cactus and succulents of Arizona. and they even have maps to show you where they're native, so you can go see them in habitat. Do not collect them, but go see them and see them in nature. And the information is a little more locally oriented, and especially the growing information. I like this book a lot, and it's just a Timber Press book, but it's pretty good. It has pretty good growing information in here. There's a website called World of Succulents that has a lot of cacti and succulents with growing information. Their English isn't their first language, so the English is kind of, sometimes a little off, not very well edited, but it's a good site. And then here's the book, the Arizona book, and we sell this one actually. So if you go onto our website, we sell this one. So this has cactus and succulents. It's mostly cactus that we have in Arizona, but we got the trophas and bursaras and yuccas and agaves and graptopetalum here in Arizona as well. So and the Fukierias, we have the Ocotillo. And so this is a very good book, and it's local. So they talk about it from here. Anyway, thank you. I'm gonna finish my beer and chill out and watch some garbage TV or something.
Yeah. And eat food.
And eat some food. I hope you enjoyed the class, and we will see you next week and talk about fruit trees. Bye.